position. Rise up, make that decision. God will provide all your needs. He wants you to succeed. Have faith of a mustard seed. Get up on your feet. Rise up.
Welcome to the Drexwell Seymour Show, where we encourage you to rise up and take your position. Today, I have a gentleman on this show who is known as the man of all seasons. He's also known as the local historian for the Turks and Caicos Islands. And his name is William Bill Clare. And I love Mr. Clare's story. Came from humble beginnings. Started out as a messenger in the district commissioner's office on the island of South Caicos, where he was born. And many years later, he became the district commissioner on the island of Providenciales. And it just tells you that, no matter where you start, it's how you end up. And so we're going to have this conversation today with Mr. Clare, how he started out in life, all the struggles, all the issues that they went through growing up, because obviously it's not the same as it was now. We want to educate the public. We also want to inspire you that no matter where you are, you can reach to the top. And Mr. Clare has reached to the top in many positions here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And so I'm delighted to have him on the show. And I'll ask Mr. Clare to introduce himself to you. Thank you, Mr. Clare.
Thank you very much, Rex. Rex, like you, I came from humble beginnings. Was born in South Caicos. Well, at that time, we called it East Harbor.
That's right.
It only got its proper name, South Caicos, when Mr. Liam McGuire came to set up some business. Just like Providenciales, we knew it as Blue Hills. And when Fritz Luddington came here in the 60s, mid-60s, to develop it, it got its real name, Providenciales. But I was born in South. In fact, I was born during the hurricane, 1945. I understand.
Oh, wow.
There were 2 hurricanes passed. And
You look good for your age, by the way.
Mrs. Larry Astwood used to call me the Hurricane Boy. Life was pretty tough because you only had the salt industry, you had the fisheries, the plant, and you had the local fishermen who got conchs to sell to Haiti. If my memory serves me well, Rex,
Right when you go back there, so we used to sell conchs to Haiti?
Yes. In fact, Rex, a lot young people don't know the role that Haiti played in the Turks and Caicos, particularly in the Caicos Islands, because conchs was the export. That's the only thing the folks did here. Well, Providenciales, with one exception, the men were divers that got lobsters. Okay, we had no divers in South Caicos that really did lobster. There was only one person who was considered a diver. That was Clifford Duncanson.
Oh.
So you had, this is where Captain Bruce comes in. You had they call it sort of a run boat, and you had the Mary Rose. The fishermen in Providenciales had their sloops with about 6 dinghies. And these sloops, they put a well in the boat. So these dinghies would go out with the divers. They would catch the lobsters, bring it to the main boat. They would put it in the well. And the boat from South Caicos would come down here, pick it up, bring it back to South Caicos.
Oh, sorry.
Where you had the women in the factory working until about 3 o'clock in the morning.
I see why they call this the local historian.
So you're mama based in Wales, Rex.
Of course.
I have to write an article on that. You got up, very few persons had tanks or cisterns in South Caicos. So every morning you virtually had to go to the well to get water for your parents to wash.
And you put that on your head?
Yes. You had to go to the tank up going by the cemetery, that big public tank, or you went to another tank with the Admiral's Arms. It's not as...
I know that one.
Right, okay. Drex, coming from the well, putting that thing on my head, I had a patch in my head. But the hair wasn't growing. My dad actually made a box scout for me and got a 5-gallon drum oil that he used to work at the garage. And me and Oliver Mills, every morning we would go up to the big tank and come back. But Drax, we were never late for school. You had to be in school at 9 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
So imagine that. Imagine the distance from where we live on the hill.
So what time did they start it?
We would probably get up from 6 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, by the time sun up, you had to be going. And you went to school. School started at 9. I think we had a break maybe around about 12 or 1. You went home, you came back, and at 3 o'clock, school was over. I'm the eldest of originally 9 kids my mom had. One died, and my father had 2 outside. One died. Maria, everybody know Maria.
Yes.
She's my eldest sister.
She was my teacher too.
Okay. So my father worked in the salt industry. He was a driver. They had the English trucks then came in. The man had to broke up the salt Drax with pickaxes and the salt pond, okay? And imagine the heat of the sun.
Oh my God.
Many of the men didn't have any hair as far as from their knee down, they had no hair because the pickle sort of took all of that off. And they had to scoop up the salt with shovels and put it in the truck. Later on, they got the front end loadness from England. And the man actually had to scoop the salt from the truck down before we had the trucks that could actually go up, you know.
Wow.
And then you remember the heaps, the salt heaps. And imagine how high those heaps used to be before they had something called a stacker that just stacked the salt up. It was amazing.
Wow.
It was amazing. Of course, Drax, at that time, we were considered, well, we still call ourselves a Christian community, even though we can put a question mark behind it.
Right.
But in South Caicos, you had the 3 main churches, the Anglicans, the Methodists, the Baptists. We had what we call a jumper church, which was the Church of God.
Yes.
Up by Norman Stubbs, where Winnie's School of Field Studies.
Okay.
The building was demolished and a hotel was built there. So you went to church at 11 o'clock. One of the things that I missed most coming here, Drax, was the ringing of the church
bells. Yeah.
And every church bell had a different sound.
Yeah. You know which church.
You know which church it was, okay? So you went to church at 11. If you didn't go at 11, you had to be in Sunday school, Drax. Every Sunday afternoon, the churches was packed.
So Sunday school was like 3 o'clock?
Yes, 3 to about 4. Then after 4 o'clock, we would walk in front, go downtown. The government had a wharf. In fact, there were 3 wharfs then, and running up 4 wharfs because the 4th wharf was the wharf where the salt used to go on.
Okay.
So the middle wharf, there was a bench at the end, and you and your girlfriend would go and sit down, or you would walk around. And that was the thing for Sunday school. Now, when grapes time, we would go up on the Commissioner Hill.
Oh, I forgot about the grapes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Season, I mean, we would pick grapes until time to leave. Drax, there was a lot of discipline. Starting at the school, you could not, I mean, if you misbehave and you were flogged, Drax, you were afraid to go home and tell your mom or your dad, well,
you get flogged again.
You got another one without any questions asked.
Wow.
There was also lickings for late, as we call it. 9 o'clock, the school door would close. And anybody coming after that, if you didn't have a piece of paper to tell the teacher why you was late, you got flogged for it.
Wow.
Looking back, you would say, my goodness, but somehow it served its time, Rex.
Yeah.
It made you...
It worked.
It did work in that time, okay? There were limited opportunities, Rex, in terms of employment. In the government office, you had the district commissioner. When I joined, you had Mr. Malcolm.
So for those who are watching, what is the district commissioner? Explain what that is.
Well, okay, the district commissioner is the chief government official on the island. He's answerable to the governor at that particular time. All other departments, in essence, is answerable to him.
Okay.
His office, it was a district commissioner. You had, it was Miss Bassett, who was the cashier. You had Mr. Stanley Brooks. You had Iris Williams. And Austin Thomas did customs. My cousin Charles Saunders, he was the messenger. I replaced him. The office opened from Monday to Saturdays, Drex.
Oh, Saturdays.
Yeah, at 1 o'clock on Saturday, the office would be closed. The local mail, we had the Seahorse, and we had also had the mailboat. Rob Gardner, the government paid him as the mailboat. He would take the mail twice a week, take it to Grand Turk, and bring back supplies for Timco. The Seahorse was the government official boat that took passengers to Grand Turk and also mail. She would go in the morning and come back in the afternoon. My job, when I was, well, I'll go back, I talk about the opportunities. At school, you had, we know the only high school was in Grand Turk. There was no system in place, Drax, for you to go to high school. When I say that,
I mean, after you finished
the primary school, there was no exam set that you could take the exam, and if you pass, they'll send you to high school. Somebody had to, what we call, pull a string. Someone had to,
so you know.
Exactly, to get you to go to high school.
Really?
Now, Mr. Jones, Ronald Jones,
I heard about him.
who was my headmaster when Mr. Bean was the first headmaster when I started school. That's Alfred Bean. Then Ronald Jones, we call him Booney Jones.
Yes, I heard about him.
Okay, he was a Methodist. Later on, he became an Anglican. And he told my father that he would try to get me into high school when I get to, I think, about class 5. I can't remember whether we had 6. Anyway, but he left and went to the Bahamas. So that dream sort of fell away.
Wow.
You were able to stay in school until you were 14. At 14, you had to leave school. I think that was because of the space racks. Now, if you were good behavior, the teacher would let you stay another year, but then you would be repeating
the same thing.
So, in essence, it didn't make really sense.
So you didn't learn anything new.
No,
just
nothing
keep you in
new.
school.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the two teachers that stood the test of time was Ms. Madry Baste and Ms. Iris Stubbs.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there were also, and you may not know, Mrs. Alan Miller.
No.
No, okay. She was a teacher for a period of time.
Is that Mr. George Wolf's sister?
No, that was George Arndt.
Oh, George Arndt.
Yeah.
Okay.
George Arndt. Drex, the government had a system in place. If you were a teacher and you get pregnant, you had to leave.
I heard about that. I heard about that.
Ms. Miller was not married, and she was pregnant, so she had to leave. You had what you call pupils. Well, she was regarded as a pupil teacher because she wasn't sort of trained. Gloria Stubbs, Blake. Okay, she was a pupil teacher until she was able to go away to be trained. Now, we had the Jamaica local exam, Drax, not like you have today with CXC and GC, etc. And when Mr. Bean came, when Stanley Bean came, he started us. He selected a number of us who, I think, in his position was capable enough to do the exams. Gloria, there was a first year, second year, and third year. If you were able to pass the third year, you had a scholarship. If you were a girl, you had 2 choices. You either do nursing or you did teaching. If you was a boy, it was teaching.
So the boys didn't have 2 choices?
No, not to my knowledge. I mean, at that time, no boy.
No boy, nurse, some
Nursing was, that was not in.
I understand.
Yeah, you didn't hear anybody, what? A man being a nurse?
Yeah.
That was, so those were the 2 choices you had. There was nothing else. Being a police, well, even then, there was no recruitment process. to be a police officer. You know, we grew up knowing Mr. Georgie and Mr. Clary and one or two others. So you find yourself in that situation. When I reached the age, I was 15 years and 9 months. I would have been 16 in September, and I left school in June. Mr. Malcolm told my father that
Bert Malcolm?
Bert Malcolm, he was the government officer then. He later became the commissioner. That Lois Bassett was due to retire, and he would take me on. So Charles, who was then the messenger, he was leaving, and my father said, "Look, Charles is leaving. I'll take Bill on, and in a year or two he will get another job." It didn't work out that way. I think I stayed on for about 2 or 3 more years working as a messenger. Then Liam McGuire was a surveyor, Drax. He came down from the UK with another gentleman, Mr. Young, from Guyanese, who was chief land surveyor. And they had some others, and they surveyed the entire Turks and Caicos Islands. That's how my friend Royal and Terry and Charlie Garland and those got into the survey.
Okay.
So he saw the potential of the Turks and Caicos Islands. And
He did.
And they say he broke his contract with the British government. After they did the surveys and they left, not long afterwards, Mr. McGuire came. He got in touch with some millionaires in Chicago, Mr. Bryan, and some folks out of Florida, some folks who they had Mr. Lindsay, 2 Lindsays. One had a newspaper, one had an aircraft business, and they formed the Caicos Company. He bought a lot of land. Now, some people felt like if he took advantage of persons, but when you look at it, he really didn't. I mean, at that time, people were paid for what the land was worth, in my opinion, as I look back. And that brought in something like a new lease on life for South Caicos.
I think I remember the name Caicos Company.
Yes.
It was in the UN's building?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the Caicos Company. Norman worked for him after he left school. Well,
Norman worked for McGuire?
yeah, Norman. Well, Norman was working with the Salt Company. Of course, the Salt Company closed in '64, and I should say something about that.
Yes.
Salt was the main industry for South Caicos. Salt Key, and to some extent Grand Turk, even though you had the 2 American bases in Grand Turk that offered employment. And the seat of government was in Grand Turk, so you had a number of persons working for government in Grand Turk. When the Salt Company closed, Drax, it was like a cloud had come over South Caicos. What the government did was they paid folks a gratuity. And it was not just. It was not fair.
But do you know why they closed this? Why?
Yes, Drax. We had a team came from the UK. What happened? Inagua and Long Island was producing far more salt and a better quality of salt than the Turks and Caicos.
Oh.
They had the facilities in Inagua, the Erickson brothers. In fact, they came here, I understand, sometimes in the 40s to buy out the salt company here, but the people who owned it didn't agree.
Want to do it.
So they went to Inagua, a new virgin land, and a number of Turks Islanders went to Inagua. They recruit them and they start the industry.
So that's how some Turks Islanders went in Inagua.
Right.
Okay.
We here, when the ship came in for salt racks, if it was in bulk, we had some barges they brought from Barbados, and we had 2 boats, the Ken W. and the Patricia. The little wharf, you might remember, I was talking about, they call it Morgan Wharf. The salt was shipped in bulk. So the trucks came, dumped the salt in the hopper, as we said. The salt went on the belt, went into the barges. The barges was pulled out to the ship. The ship is outside the harbor. Depending on the quantity of salt, it may take almost a week for that to happen.
Oh.
And in Agua Drax, they invested on a belt that maybe went a mile out. The ship just came under the belt, and the trucks came in and dumped the soil, and in 24 hours or 36 hours, the ship had its cargo on its way. So you see that. So the British government decided that, look, we don't have the land mass to expand the salt industry. It's a dying industry. We're not going to get young people going to salt pans to break up salt. We're going to close it down. We're going to pay these people off.
I see.
So they close it down. They calculate how much money people should get because of the amount of years they work. And as I say, it wasn't fair, but I guess in their opinion it was just. So everybody was given a bank book. You came in, you signed your name for your check, the bank book was written up, they gave it to you. You might have known, or may not have known, the government had a savings bank. Before the banks came.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, government had a savings bank in South Caicos, South Caicos, and Grand Turk. So you could go and put your money in. There was, I don't know what percentage they gave you interest rates, but that is the system they had. Okay, so one or two persons had a choice, depending on your age. You could say, okay, I'm not gonna take the money. I want a pension. Now I remember about 2 or 3 persons, my uncle Hubby Mills and about 2 or 3 others decided, okay, I'll take my pension. So every month they got a pension until they died.
Okay.
The other thing, most of the young men would work at the garage on the weekends or when school closed. So our boys were mechanically minded Drex. Because of that, a number of them had opportunities to go sailing.
And do you think it's because of the environment that they're more or less forced to be mechanical?
I think so, because there's only other 2 things. Either mechanics or you'll be a carpenter, like Sherlin Thomas and Wilfred and those. They went with Mr. Walter.
Yeah, I wish I knew.
They learned carpentry.
I wish I knew carpentry. I wish.
Now, my dad wanted me to be a tailor, but I would have had to go to Grand Turk to work with Kenneth Malcolm, who was working with government, but it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Then there was, you had Bo Seymour in South Caicos.
I knew Bo.
Okay.
He's a tailor.
Yes. Winston Seymour, but Winston left early. He was married to my cousin, Mattie Clare. They went to the Bahamas.
Okay.
So that was it. So the young man, now that was another thing. Somebody who was sailing, who knew you or knew your parents, and knew you well, would recommend you to come out and sail, to be like a training engineer on oilmen. Now, Bud Sanders, Kenneth Malcolm, Kenneth Lightman, Lorna brother, they went out sailing. My cousin, Clevie Mills,
yes,
he went out. Clifford Stubbs was the main, like the chief engineer for the company. John Stubbs went out from North Caicos. We had German, and a number of boys went out, and eventually Russell Harvey, who married my cousin Bethel,
yes,
they did well. They became chief engineers. My brother Ed, the other side of the coin, National Bulk Carriers out of New York were recruiting men. Well, most of the guys who got the opportunity were those from South Caicos and Grand Turk. A few from South Caicos. National Bulk was carrying oil and ore. Their ships carried oil and ore. Perry Seymour was the first boy from South Caicos who went out. Then my brother Ed and Sherlin Thomas.
Okay.
They went out.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I don't remember, I can't remember who else went, but you'll go out for about a year, then they'll bring you home for about 2 or 3 weeks, and you go back again.
Okay.
So they saw the other side of the world, you know.
That was great exposure.
Yes, it was.
Opportunity.
Very much so. My brother Ed, he came back, he worked for the fisheries department for a while. then he had an opportunity to go back sailing for, well, the Erickson Company was sold out to West India Shipping Company. Tropical took it over. So
That's the same company that owned the shipping, that owned the salt?
yes, that was the same company that owned the salt. The ships were sold out because they had named the ships. All the ships had Inagua on it, like the Inagua Cloud, the Inagua Light, the Inagua Bay, the Inagua so and so. So Ed went out and he sailed for a while. My brother Butch went out, but after 10 months, Harry Lightburn sent for him. Harry Lightburn, you don't know him. Harry spent all his life that he had two brothers, Buttram and Alvin. His parents were from South Caicos. His mom was Susan Lightburn. She was Miss Doris Lightburn's sister. That's and Mr. Joe Henson. Anyway,
I know Joe. I know he was married to my cousin.
Yes. So Ed went out, Butch went out, but he said the noise from the engines, he couldn't deal with it. So he got a job as a photographer for Royal Caribbean Line through George Walkin.
Okay.
Now, George Walkin was able to recruit a number of guys. Penman Brooks was one, Rustin, and some others. They went out on the cruise ships. A couple of them went as stewards, but most of the boys from South, they became photographers.
Yeah.
So that was the only way out. Now, going back to the salt industry, after the salt industry was closed, we had to find an alternative. So they thought that tourism would be a way out. So they made regulations to form a tourist board in 1971. Norman Saunders, who was the local representative, became the chairman. Barclay Barron, who was chief pilot for Air Caicos. Hubert James, who was manager.
You got a good memory, Mr. Clare.
Yeah.
Wow.
Manager for British Fidelity. Mr. Morgan, Mr. Morgan was a member of Parliament, a member of the House, Legislative Council from South Caicos.
Okay. Oh yes, the Morgans are from South Caicos.
Yeah. The magistrate, Mr. Cridlin, Major John Wainwright, he was the brother to the administrator, Robin Wainwright. They comprise of the tourist board.
Okay.
Norma Alton Goodrich worked for the tourist board for many years. And the rest is more or less history in terms of the tourist board.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize we had a tourist board in place from the early 1970s.
From the 1970s.
I didn't realize that.
We didn't have the amount of money to put into it. Now, unlike the Bahamas, the Bahamas claim that Columbus landed in San Salvador.
I know.
When in essence, he did. He landed in the Turks and Caicos, but we couldn't dispute that at that time. We didn't have the means to prove all of that. Years later, there was an expedition. I don't know whether it was the National Geographic Society, but Columbus' voyage was actually traced by ship, landed up in Grand Turk. I had the article. I have to see if I can get another copy, but I had the article on it showing everything, and I gave it to high school.
Oh, the high school.
Yeah, I have to write because I'm a member. My member's ship has left, but I intend to renew it and ask them if they can find a copy of that. Going back to education, Drax, the Adventist Church came in 1968, and Pastor Wesley from Jamaica was the principal. They started school at the house where the Adventist Church is now. You remember there was a two-story building on the university office in South Caicos.
Yes.
It got burned down, okay? So that was the residence. They had some classes there. Then they had some classes.
So that's when the Pearson High School started.
Yes, Pearson High School had. Then they, next door to, you remember the Benevolent Hall?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, they used the Benevolent Hall also.
Okay. Yeah. So the Pearson High School then became the second
high
school in the Turks and Caicos.
Yeah. You had to, of course, you had to pay.
Yes,
But
it was a private school.
Private school, very disciplined. Me and
Yes.
Norman and
My
some
sister
others.
went there.
Yeah, we became, we were a committee in case there were some disciplinary actions. But they did very well, and they had a good system, a very competitive system.
They did.
So the students really, they strive to see how far they can go. Well, the government took it over in the 70s. Well, in 1976, we had internal government came in, ministerial government.
Yes.
And I can't remember the exact year when they took it over. It might have been, they were negotiating it during Jake's time, but it might have happened after because I remember.
Was it 1980?
It could have been the early 1980s, yes.
79, I don't know.
Because this guy, I forgot his name, he was minister. He became Minister of Education. Skippins was the Minister of Education there. Skippins was the chief minister when this happened. And the government took it over and everything sort of changed there. Mr. Knight became the principal. Mr. Knight was married to one of the Mizik daughters.
Yeah, he's still married. Yeah.
Right, he's still married. He's got some kids. Well, his son is actually a dentist. Then later, I think Oliver Mills taught. I don't know for how long. But
Yeah, he taught me. He taught me
okay.
literature and Bible knowledge, I think.
Okay, yeah, he was there. Going back to the primary school, George Fulford, when Miss Marjorie retired, Marjorie Baster, George Fulford became the principal. And when he left, Kay Durham,
Yes.
she became the principal. One of the sad things, Drax, the school was demolished, the building was demolished.
Yeah.
I have a photo of it. I can get you a copy. I know you would
I love
love
to.
to have it. I'll get a copy for you. They said it was moth and some other stuff, but
Yeah.
when you look back now and
You think it probably could have been restored.
exactly. The government on the southern side, Drax, there was a separate room. The government built it as a cinema to show movies. Now, you might not have known that.
The government had its own.
The government had, it came from Grand Turk, but once or twice a week.
Really?
They used to show the movies and the primary school in Grand Turk.
Okay.
And
'Cause I only know about the theater. I think Daniel Malcolm.
yeah,
had a theater,
right.
And I think Mr. Dick Alice.
Right. So the government ran this. The movies would come from Grand Turk
Wow.
to the district commissioner.
Sounds like things were better back then than they are now.
And they used to have the movies there. So they built that extra thing there just for, so you'll have a little more space. Anything in particular else, you specific questions you want to ask?
Yeah, I want to ask you now because you started out as a messenger, because you say there was not much
Exactly.
opportunities there. I want you to tell the audience how you was able to progress to become
Okay.
the district commissioner.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, Drax. I joined the service in the 1st of June, 1961 as a messenger. The government used to have a daily broadcast through cable and wireless in Grand Turk. We had a wireless system, I think twice a day. We would send telegrams to Grand Turk in the morning and in the afternoon. Stanley Brooks was the operator. And he also had to balance the books in the afternoon.
The cable wireless.
Yeah, no, this is in South Caicos.
Oh, okay.
We had the wireless in South Caicos and one in Salt Key.
Okay.
Okay, so we sent telegrams. You had to hand write the telegrams and type them out. And so
Wow.
after this is the other thing, Drax, I taught myself how to type. there was, the government had one of these big typewriters, manual, and there was a Royal typewriter. Stanley Brooks owned it. The letters, you could type in the dark.
Oh, it's very visible.
Yes, blew it up. So I would go in early in the morning, and Mr. Lloyd Stubbs, either whether he gave it to me or he loaned me a book of exercises. Must be 1,000 of them. And I went through all of them tracks. When I was finished, the only persons who could type faster than me or better than me was Norman Sanders and Stanley Brooks. Okay?
So you taught yourself?
Yes. So after about 6 months, I had to go down with Mr. Brooks in case somebody wanted to speak to someone. I would have to go and call them.
Yeah.
And after about 6 months, he told Mr. Malcolm, well, look, Bill is good enough. I'm going to let Bill do the afternoon schedule. So, but I think it's about maybe 2 or 3 o'clock, I would go down and take the telegrams, write them out, and deliver them when I leave. McGuire started the Caicos Company. And at that time, there was a lot of traffic. Private aircrafts were being ferried from Miami to Venezuela and Brazil. There were small airplanes, so they didn't have the capacity to fly the entire route. So they would come from Miami. Some would either stop in Nassau or Exuma. Then they would stop in South Caicos, go on to San Juan or the Dominican Republic and go down
So
the
they
chain.
get to come for fuel.
Yes, until they reached Brazil. He saw that, well, after he started, you start have about 1 or 2 airplanes coming in. Then you had 3 and 4 a day like that. So he made an arrangement with the government to have an officer station at the airport. He will pay during the weekend, Sunday and Monday, he will pay the government the fees for the officer. But also you collect overtime fees, like if a plane came in after 4 o'clock,
Right, after
they had
hours.
to pay that. All Saturdays, all Sunday, they had to pay overtime fees. That fees went to you as the officer. After a certain hour, you got that. And the government, McGuire would pay them at the end of the month, whatever the hours were. Also, you had yachts coming through. Private yachts coming from Miami to South Caicos, going to Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And so he had a lot of fuel. Well, the depot was Miss Castana House, which became the Admiral's Arms Hotel.
Yeah.
He had a number
I
of
heard about
tanks.
this
Yeah.
kind of.
In fact, at one point, Drax, South Caicos, the only 2 islands in the Bahamas that had more fuel than us was Nassau and Freeport.
Really?
There was about 250,000 gallons of fuel in South Caicos.
And that was owned by McGuire?
No, it was owned by the Caicos Company, but it was fuel from ASSO. He had to pay ASSO so much a gallon. So it was like he was trusting the fuel was being loaned to him. And at the end of the month, they had
He will pay his bill.
Exactly.
Okay.
So he worked out that they need to have somebody at the airport, because every time an airplane came, Mr. Malcolm Austin and the police had to go to the airport, and time was consuming. So Mr. Malcolm decided he would appoint me as a customs officer.
Okay.
I wasn't trained as a customs officer, but what needed to be done, I know what had to be done. So I would go, and he got a loan from the government for 20 pounds for me to buy a bicycle. Well, Rex, a bicycle was like a car then, you know?
Yeah, the privilege is.
Yes. So I got this bicycle, and he said, okay, Bill, I will work out either 2 pounds a week, a month you pay back, until you pay the $20. So that was done. Now, anytime after 4 o'clock, if any planes came in, he or Austin would go down. Mr. King, an English guy, came in 1968 to look at the customs department, to probably set it up. The United Nations Development Program out of Jamaica would fund this program. So I was appointed as the first officer to go and do this course in Trinidad in 1969. And I
Wow, I wasn't born yet.
so I did, it was a 23 weeks course. I went in January, came back the end of June, and I went into Grand Turk for 6 months. But prior to that, Provo started development in 1966 for Sluddington,
Okay.
Provident Limited. So they needed customs service. So the government sent Corporal Grant. He was Corporal Grant down here to see what he can do with customs and immigration and police. And after he left, Stanley Williams came. So I came back in '69. I was in Grand Turk for 6 months.
I mean, Stanley Williams.
Stanley Williams, he became he succeeded Grant here after Grant left.
Okay.
He came in. So when I came back, John Robinson, who became Collector of Customs, he went to Trinidad. He came back at the end of '69, and Austin Thomas went in January of '70. So I came to South Caicos 1970.
Okay.
When Austin came back, he went to Grand Turk for 6 months. So I spent the whole 1970 in South Caicos.
Okay, the whole year.
Right, the whole year.
The year I was born.
So we had Stanley Williams stayed until 1972, the end of '72, and they sent me down to Provo in '73. I opened up the customs office.
So that's how you're not on Provo.
Yes. Okay. Also, Drax, we had Maguire went to Pine Key to open the Marine Club, or to build the Marine Club. So I had to go there. There was no customs service there. So between me and Austin, we had to go there to clear the ships. They started the hotel in North Caicos, the Prospect of Whidbey.
Yes.
We had no customs service there. So an aircraft used to come, a C-46 aircraft, a cargo, would come in and bring building supplies. So we had to be there to also do that. I came, opened up the post in '73. I stayed until the end of September '74. I took 3 months vacation. I went back to South Caicos. And '79, in '77, they sent me to Grand Turk for 6 months. I came back.
You as a custom officer?
Yes. I came back to South Caicos at the end. '78, I spent all in South Caicos. '79, I came to Provo. Spent 1 year, went back to South. 1981, they sent me back here. Well, me and Austin was changing places.
Rotating.
In '73, they promoted me as a district commissioner.
Wow, '73.
Yes, and 1990, I became an assistant chief secretary. The government decided that they was going to upgrade the post here and make it a deputy chief secretary post. Mr. Cox, who was the chief secretary, he told me about it, and he said, "Bill, in essence, you should get the post, but I can't give it to you. The system is you have to apply for it." He said, "Now somebody else is applying for it," but he didn't tell me who the person was. It was Miss Cynthia Astrid. Somehow she got the post, so I was transferred to Grand Turk to succeed her as establishment secretary.
Okay.
When she came here. Somehow after, I don't know whether it was 3 months or so, Rex, Miss Astrid complained that things were not working out for her, that she was being threatened. She got letters of threat. And she came into Grand Turk, and she came back. And the chief secretary said, "Well, Mrs. Astrid is back." And I said, "Well, I don't have a problem. We've always worked together. If you wanted to come back in the office, came back. She came back to the office. But that was at my detriment when that happened. there was Mr. Robinson, Ossie Robinson, that was acting as chief secretary.
Chief Secretary?
Yeah. Things were not. I was in a different world as a Drax. The authority that I had here as the district commissioner, I didn't have that
Right.
publicity. I mean, I was in the newspapers here as the district commissioner. That didn't happen. In the end, I was very frustrated. And one day I went to see Sterling Garland, and Washington Music was chief minister. And in the conversation, I actually broke down and cried.
Wow.
So Washington came in and he said, I know, what happened. As a politician, I'm not supposed to get into civil service matters. But I promise you this, Norma is leaving the tourist board. I'll send you back in charge of the tourist board. You'll be there.
So that's how you became, okay.
So Stalin said, one thing, said transferring him, he shouldn't lose a dime. If anything, his salary should be increased. So he said, okay, you'll take care of that. Said, you write the chief secretary about that. So Miss Astrid became chief secretary, and she was very kind. We had a very good relationship. She said, Bill, I'm going to make sure that nothing goes wrong for you. We're going to pay you the allowance. Yeah. You can get car allowance as well. So I came down, and after that was in the 90s, 92. I spent 5.5 years running the tourist board. And then in 98, I came back into the civil service as chief protocol officer. Governor Kelly.
Right. I remember that.
Governor Kelly wanted me to come back. Then Kingsley Bean, then they changed the post to permanent secretary for Providenciales Affairs. They brought Kingsley Bean here. So Ms. Astrid said, Bill, I know you and Kingsley always had a good relationship, and I want you to work along with him. You know Provo like you had anything. So I said, no problem. So we had a good relationship. When he would go off, I acted as permanent secretary. When the PNP came into power, Mike Visick wanted 2 permanent secretaries, him and Mr. Gardner, who passed on, became the 2 secretaries. They shared up the ministry. Then they wanted to open up the customs office in New York. They had a representative. They had a company there that was doing work for the tourist board, but they thought a presence should be there. So Kingsley went, and I acted about 1.5 years as permanent secretary.
Okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes. Then after that, they decided that they will downgrade the post to deputy chief secretary, and they gave the post to Miss Elon Brooks.
Okay.
I was still acting, but somehow things happened so strange. I never got a letter from them to say, well, this is what's going to happen. So I called Miss Dr. Linda. I said, I understand Mr. Brooks. I said, Mr. Brooks is here. I said, I didn't have a letter from anybody to say what was happening. And so I still had to perform the duties as chief protocol officer. And we had a good working relationship. And I stayed there until I retired in 2007, completed 46 years.
Wow. Well, wow. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for your contribution to the Turks and Caicos Islands government, and to the country, actually, not the government, to the country. And I also want to thank you that you remain in Turks and Caicos, because a lot of people, they opted and went to the Bahamas, but you stayed here, and ultimately you end up becoming, hold a high position here in the Turks and Caicos. And I just hope that this interview will resonate and send a message of hope to a lot of people who are wondering where I'm going to go, you got to stick it up.
Yeah.
And your attitude to me, and your reputation and your character, to me, you seem like played a very important part. People knew you, they knew you stood for, they could depend on you. And so they was able to trust you into those positions. And I think that makes a lot of difference. Thank you.
I should, and I think I should say this, Drax, that apart from that and the sort of social, I'm a Methodist,
Yes.
and I've been a Methodist local preacher for 50 years.
Wow.
I got 3 certificates, one when I did 20, one when I did 40, and one when I did 50. I was always involved in youth work. We ran the regatta, Norman Saunders and I, for many years.
Yes.
Cricket
Yes.
also.
Cricket was a big thing.
Yes,
It was
and even in Boy Scouts. And today, Drax, many people will think that I went to college or high school.
I know.
didn't. I'm a self-made man.
I know.
But the point is, Drax, being involved in these different things brings the best out of you.
Yes.
You know, being a leader, it helps. And you know, you can wake me up any time of the night.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm alert and I can speak to certain things. So to the young people out there, it helps. It makes you a more rounded person when you're involved in church and other social clubs.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I thank you for giving me that.
Thank you. How old are you, Mr. Clare?
I'm 76.
Wow.
I'll be 77 in September of this year.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Wow.
But one of the things, Rex, when we talk about opportunities, when I grew up, and all the boys left, those who then went sailing, I went to Freeport, and just me and Stanley Bean was left in South Caicos. But I made a vow. I said, you know, these guys are going away. One day they're coming back home.
I tell you.
And when they do, they can tip their hats to Bill Clare.
Yeah.
And it worked out.
And
that
it's
way,
happening.
Rex.
It's happening.
Good.
Well, thank you for watching the Drexwell Steamer Show. I hope you had an insight of how life was growing up in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and to see, you know, the same qualities back then are the same qualities you need today in order to be successful, I believe. And I just hope that this show inspired you. It certainly inspired me and encouraged me as well to maintain a sense of character, to maintain your integrity, and to work very hard and to get involved also in community affairs. So thank you for watching the Drexel Steamer Show.